It was a cold afternoon, with heavy clouds covering the sky as if the whole world were in mourning. Marley, a blind golden retriever, lay on the hard ground of an abandoned park. His golden fur, now dull and dirty, stuck to the damp earth as his breathing grew increasingly shallow. He had no strength to get up, and the emptiness around him was almost as crushing as the pain in his frail body. Marley was on the brink of the end, alone and forgotten, until a soft sound, almost imperceptible, broke the silence. Light, careful footsteps, followed by a low, firm meow. From a nearby bush, Charlie, a tabby cat with bright green eyes, appeared. His expression seemed to carry an unusual purpose. He stopped when he saw the dog and watched, as if assessing the situation. Marley raised his head with difficulty, reacting to the small visitor's scent. Charlie approached slowly, moving with calm assurance, and began to rub against Marley. The dog, nearly out of strength, let out a weak groan. But Charlie didn't back away. Instead, he began meowing, louder and louder, as if trying to call someone, anyone, to help them. Charlie's meows echoed through the park, reaching a woman who was walking with her son nearby. Intrigued and concerned, she followed the sound and arrived at the scene, leaving her speechless. Marley was motionless, barely breathing, while Charlie stayed by his side, vigilant like a guardian. The woman quickly crouched down, her eyes welling up as she saw the golden's condition. "You're trying to save him, aren't you?" she murmured to the cat while petting Marley's head. In a hurry, she called for rescue services, but fearing there wasn't enough time, she decided to act on her own. She carried Marley to her car, and Charlie, without hesitation, jumped in alongside her, refusing to leave him. At the veterinary clinic, the diagnosis was grim. Marley was severely malnourished and had an infection that left him between life and death. The veterinarians began emergency treatment, but everyone knew the chances were slim. During every minute of that long battle, Charlie stayed by Marley's side, purring non-stop, as if that sound was an energy current keeping the dog fighting. The medical team was amazed by the bond between them. It was as if Charlie was more than just a friend. He was the only thread preventing Marley from giving up entirely. Days later, against all odds, Marley opened his eyes, blind, but full of life. He started eating, getting up, and eventually walking, guided by the soft steps of Charlie. When Marley left the clinic for the first time, with Charlie walking beside him, everyone who witnessed the scene felt tears streaming down their faces. The blind dog and the fearless cat had proven that, even in the darkest moments, friendship can work miracles. And Marley, now saved, had a new outlook on life. Not through his eyes, but through his heart. What do you think will happen next with Marley and Charlie? Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below with your predictions for this touching story. The clock at the veterinary clinic read midnight, but the recovery room was far from quiet. The rhythmic sound of Charlie's purring was constant, softly echoing between the beeps of Marley's heart monitor. The veterinary team had already noticed something extraordinary. Whenever the cat moved away, Marley's vital signs would fluctuate. But when Charlie snuggled back up to the golden retriever, resting his small head against the dog's body, Marley's breathing would stabilize, as if the cat's presence were the anchor that kept the dog tethered to life. The days that followed were a roller coaster of hope and despair. Marley fought bravely against the infection, but his fragility was evident. Each forced meal and each medication seemed like a colossal effort. The woman who had rescued them, whose name was now revealed to be Grace, began visiting every day, bringing little treats for Charlie and words of encouragement for Marley. During one of these visits, Grace noticed something that moved her deeply. Charlie wasn't just staying by the dog's side, he was guiding him. When Marley tried to lift his head or shift position, the cat would position himself strategically, touching the spots on the dog's body where he seemed to need support the most. As the weeks passed, Marley's progress was slow but undeniable. The veterinarian once commented, "There's no medical explanation for this, Grace. This dog should have given up by now. I'd say he's alive by sheer willpower, or because of the cat." Those words stayed with Grace, who now spent more time contemplating the unlikely bond between the two animals. With each passing day, she felt more connected to their story, to the point where she began to believe that perhaps fate had led Charlie to find Marley that fateful afternoon. Despite the improvements, Marley still had a long way to go. He was learning to trust again, not just humans, but himself. His blindness was a constant challenge, but Charlie seemed determined to be his eyes. One afternoon, while Marley was trying to take his first steps outside the kennel, Charlie led the way. The cat walked a few steps ahead, stopped, looked back, and meowed softly, guiding the golden as if he were a seasoned companion on a dangerous expedition. Grace watched it all with tears in her eyes, feeling that she was witnessing something rare and special. The bond between Marley and Charlie was not only moving, it was transformative. Other animals at the clinic seemed to sense the strength of their friendship, as they remained calm when the two were near. The staff began calling Charlie the walking miracle, and Marley was the living proof that, even in the darkest of adversities, a spark of hope could be enough to rekindle life. And as Marley took hesitant but determined steps alongside Charlie, one thing was certain: their story was just beginning. The morning was cool, with a faint smell of wet grass drifting in through the open windows of the clinic. Marley was standing for the first time in weeks. His steps were slow and uncertain, each movement seeming to require superhuman effort. By his side, Charlie walked in silence, his small body always close enough to touch the golden retrievers. The cat kept pace, like an experienced guide, and whenever Marley hesitated, Charlie would stop, look back, and let out an encouraging meow. It was a delicate dance, a moment of pure synchronicity that seemed more powerful than any medical treatment. Grace watched from a distance, her heart torn between the joy of seeing Marley walking again and the sadness that still lingered over the dog's fragility. She knew Marley's recovery was slow, but every small step forward was a victory. Still, there was a shadow of uncertainty in her eyes. What if he doesn't recover fully? What if Charlie loses Marley? She thought, unable to shake the feeling that their fates were so deeply intertwined that one could not continue without the other. The following days brought moments of small triumphs and challenges. During an impromptu physical therapy session in the clinic's backyard, Marley stumbled over a rock he couldn't see. He fell hard, letting out a whimper that made everyone hold their breath. Charlie immediately ran to him, circling around him, meowing urgently. Marley lay still for a moment, trembling from fear and exhaustion. But the soft touch of Charlie's paw on his head seemed to say, "You can do it, buddy. Don't give up now." Slowly, Marley got up, shaking his body, and took another step. The story of Marley and Charlie began to attract attention. Grace shared a video of the two on a local social network, where people quickly became moved by the unlikely friendship. Comments poured in from all corners, offering support and even donations to help with Marley's treatment costs. One woman, particularly touched, wrote, "This story reminded me that we all need a Charlie in our lives, someone who inspires us to keep going, even when we can't see the way." Grace, moved by the words, realized that Marley and Charlie's impact went far beyond the clinic. They were touching hearts everywhere. As the sun set that day, painting the sky orange and pink, Marley and Charlie lay side by side on the clinic's porch. The golden retriever, still fragile, rested his nose on the small body of the cat, while Charlie gently purred. For Marley, each breath felt lighter, as if, for the first time in a long time, he could feel the warmth of life returning. For Charlie, his mission was clear. No matter how much time or effort it took, he would guide Marley until the golden could walk on his own under the sunlight. The day broke bright, with a clear sky and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of the flowers from the clinic's garden. Marley seemed restless, his paws moving hesitantly as he lay in the corner he now called his refuge. Grace noticed something different about him. Maybe he's ready, she thought, watching Charlie jump around the golden retriever, as if he too sensed the change. Marley couldn't see the world around him, but his instincts told him there was something beyond the clinic's walls. With an improvised leash, Grace helped Marley get up. Charlie, as always, took his place by the dog's side, walking with steady steps and renewed confidence. It was time to take him outside, beyond the backyard where he had learned to walk again. Each step Marley took was carefully measured, his movements cautious yet determined. Charlie led the way, his soft paws on the sidewalk, occasionally looking back as if to say, "Follow me, I'm here." Grace walked beside them, holding the leash and watching every reaction of Marley closely. As they walked through the neighborhood, the world seemed more alive. Marley lifted his head to sniff the fresh air, catching the scents of cut grass, flowers, and even the other dogs passing by in the distance. For a brief moment, he hesitated, sensing the smell of something familiar, perhaps memories of better times. The past seemed to whisper through the breeze, but Marley shook his head, as if pushing the memory away and deciding to live in the present. Charlie, noticing the brief hesitation, leaped ahead and meowed, bringing Marley back to their walk. The journey, though short, was a milestone. Neighbors stopped to watch the pair, admiring the bond between the blind dog and the protective cat. An elderly woman, sitting on her porch, said with tears in her eyes, "They have something that we humans forget. A true, unconditional connection." Marley seemed to feel the energy around him, his ears perking up with each new sound. The world was starting to make sense again, even if he couldn't see it. Every step was an act of courage, and Charlie was always there, being his eyes and his safety. When they returned to the clinic, Marley was exhausted, but something in his posture was different. He walked with a little more confidence, as if the simple act of exploring the world around him had rekindled something inside of him. Grace gently petted his head and said, "You were amazing today." Charlie lay down next to the golden retriever, purring as always. As Marley rested, the sun bathed the two of them in soft light, and the future seemed brighter. That first journey was more than just a step. It was a symbol that Marley was ready to face life again, with Charlie by his side every moment. The following days brought more progress for Marley, but also something unexpected: memories. As he walked through the clinic's garden with Charlie by his side, familiar scents began to stir memories from the time before his blindness, before the abandonment. Certain smells and sounds, like the sound of children playing or the scent of old wood, transported him back to a time when his life was different. Marley had no words, but in his mind, the images were vivid. A cozy house, a boy who used to hug him, laughter filling the rooms. Grace noticed the change in Marley. He began to seem restless, as if he were caught between the present and something he couldn't leave behind. During one of their walks, Marley suddenly stopped. His muscles tensed, and he raised his head to the air, sniffing intensely. Charlie also stopped, watching the golden with his keen eyes. Marley took a few quick steps, as if following something invisible. Grace tried to hold him back with the leash, but she felt there was an urgency in the dog's movements, something she still didn't understand. That's when Grace realized Marley was reacting to something deep, something she couldn't see, but that he clearly felt. Determined to help him, she began investigating. Back at the clinic, she asked the vet if Marley had any old records, but nothing was found. It was as if the golden had no history, as if it had been erased when he was abandoned. However, Grace didn't give up. Using social media, she started sharing more about Marley, hoping that someone would recognize the dog and could provide clues about his past. Meanwhile, Charlie seemed to understand Marley's internal struggle. The cat began acting differently, staying even closer to the golden, touching him with his paw and purring when Marley appeared lost in thought. To Grace, it was clear that Charlie wasn't just helping Marley physically, but emotionally as well, offering a silent yet constant support. Marley began to depend on Charlie more, as if the cat was the only thing keeping him grounded in the present, while the past tried to pull him back. Days later, Grace received an unexpected message on her post. An attached photo showed a young golden retriever with bright eyes full of life, the same dog who was now by her side, blind and marked by time. The message said, "This is Marley. He was my son's dog. We lost him a year ago." Grace's heart raced. She looked at Marley, resting beside Charlie, and realized that a new journey was about to begin. Marley's past was about to be revealed, but what would it mean for his future? What do you think Marley's past will reveal? Comment below with your thoughts and share what you think lies ahead for him and Charlie on this new journey. Grace couldn't get the message out of her head. The photo of young Marley, with bright, joyful eyes, contrasted with the dog who now rested beside Charlie. She immediately responded to the person who had sent the message, a woman named Linda. The reply came within minutes. Marley was my son Ethan's best friend. When we moved last year, he disappeared. We searched for him, but never found him. Ethan still talks about him every day. Grace felt a weight on her chest. Marley's past wasn't just a story of abandonment, but of loss and longing. She looked at Marley, who seemed restless that night. Maybe he knew that something was changing. Charlie was curled up next to the golden retriever, as always, but there was a tension in the air. Grace decided she needed more information before deciding what to do. She called Linda the next day, and the conversation was filled with emotion. Linda described how Ethan and Marley were inseparable. The boy would read to the dog, sleep beside him, and even cry in his golden fur on hard days. He was more than just a dog. He was Ethan's family, Linda said, her voice trembling. Grace began to question whether bringing Marley back to his old home would be the best thing for him. Marley had changed. He was now a blind dog, marked by the pain of his journey. Would Ethan recognize the same dog who had left? And more importantly, would Marley be able to handle the weight of revisiting a past he might not fully understand? Grace's dilemma grew with each passing minute, but as she pondered, Charlie seemed determined to keep Marley grounded. The cat was more watchful than ever, his green eyes always fixed on the golden retriever, as if he could sense the inner turmoil of his friend. That afternoon, Grace decided to test what Marley remembered. She brought an old blanket that Linda had sent in the mail, something that had belonged to Ethan and that Marley used to lay on in his old home. As soon as the blanket was placed next to the golden, Marley lifted his head, sniffing the fabric with an almost desperate intensity. He began making small noises, as if trying to communicate. Grace watched, tears in her eyes, as Marley nudged the blanket with his nose, searching for something that seemed just beyond his reach. Charlie, always by his side, purred softly, as if comforting his friend amid the emotional storm. The next day, Grace made her decision. She sent a message to Linda. "I'm bringing Marley to you. He deserves the chance to reconnect with the ones he loved. And Ethan deserves the same." Despite feeling nervous, Grace knew that this reunion would be crucial for Marley. As she prepared the car for the trip, Charlie jumped into the back seat, refusing to be left behind. Marley, though blind, seemed to sense that something important was about to happen. He lay down beside Charlie, and together, they waited for the next chapter of their journey. The reunion was close, but no one knew if it would bring healing or a new challenge. The drive to Linda's house was long and silent, except for Charlie's constant purring and Marley's soft sighs from the back seat. Grace drove with a heavy heart, wondering how the reunion would go. Would Ethan still recognize Marley, now so different from the dog he had lost? And Marley, blind and emotionally fragile, would he be able to face the memories that might resurface? The doubt hung in the air like a shadow, but Grace knew this was an opportunity they couldn't let slip away. When they arrived, Linda was at the door with little Ethan by her side. The boy was holding an old blue collar with Marley's name engraved on it, his eyes shining with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. "Is it really him, Mom?" Ethan asked, his voice hesitant. Before Linda could respond, Grace opened the car door, and Charlie jumped out, closely followed by Marley, who walked unsteadily on the ground. Ethan took a few steps forward, gripping the leash tightly. "Marley," he called, his voice breaking at the end of the word. Marley suddenly stopped, his ears perked up, catching the sound that seemed so familiar. He raised his nose, sniffing the air urgently, and began walking toward the boy. Charlie was right beside him, guiding him with precision, as if he knew exactly where to lead his friend. When Marley finally reached Ethan, the boy knelt down, letting the leash fall. He wrapped his arms around the dog, his face pressed against the golden fur. "I thought I'd never see you again," Ethan sobbed, while Marley, unable to see, tilted his head toward the boy, as if he could feel the familiarity of that touch. Grace and Linda watched the scene with tears in their eyes. Marley was still, but his body seemed to relax in Ethan's arms, as if the peace he had been seeking had finally been found. Charlie, on the other hand, curled up next to the two, purring softly, as if saying, "Mission accomplished." Ethan noticed the cat for the first time and looked at him with curiosity. "Is this your friend, Marley? Did he help you come back?" Linda smiled when she heard the gratitude in her son's voice, while Grace briefly explained the story of Charlie and Marley. That moment marked the beginning of something new. Ethan and Marley still had a lot to rebuild, and the golden retriever, now blind, needed time and patience to adjust to the old house and the new dynamic. But one thing was certain. The love between the boy and his dog was unbreakable, and Charlie, the loyal companion, was now part of the family. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Marley lay down next to Ethan on the lawn, with Charlie curled up nearby. They were together, and for the first time in a long while, everything felt right. Linda's house was filled with memories. Every corner seemed to whisper stories that Marley had forgotten, but were now resurfacing in fragments of sounds, smells, and touches. The scent of the old wood floor, the sound of Ethan's laughter, and the warmth of the rug where Marley lay for the first time in years created a familiar yet challenging atmosphere. Ethan spent hours beside Marley, stroking his fur and telling stories about the happy times they'd shared. "Do you still like chasing the ball, Marley? Or do you prefer those meat-scented treats?" Ethan asked, as Marley tilted his head, as if trying to remember. Charlie, on the other hand, seemed tireless. He followed Marley everywhere, keeping a constant watch. When Marley hesitated walking down the hallway, Charlie was there, purring and gently tapping his paws on the ground, guiding his friend with the same patience as always. For Ethan, Charlie's presence was as intriguing as it was comforting. "You're really Marley's guardian angel, aren't you?" he whispered one night, as he watched the two of them sleeping side by side. The adjustment wasn't easy. On more than one occasion, Marley bumped into furniture or tripped over rugs, letting out frustrated whimpers that broke Ethan and Linda's hearts. But with every stumble, Charlie was there, supporting Marley with a quiet determination that impressed everyone. Grace continued to visit the family, offering advice on how to care for Marley in his new condition. "Remember, he's relearning how to live," she said once. "And Charlie is helping more than any of us." As the days went by, Marley began to get used to his old home again. He followed the sound of Ethan's laughter and even tried to play with him, chasing a ball that the boy rolled slowly across the floor. Although he couldn't see it, Marley seemed to sense the joy in the air and responded with hesitant but determined movements. The bond between the boy and the dog started to grow stronger once more, as if time and distance had been nothing but a brief pause in an eternal connection. One evening, while everyone was gathered in the living room, Ethan picked up a guitar and began to play softly. The melody filled the space, and Marley laid his head in Ethan's lap, while Charlie nestled beside them. Linda, watching the scene, couldn't hold back her tears. "We're a family again," she thought, as the sound of the music, the warmth of their company, and the presence of these two inseparable friends filled the house with a peace that had long been gone. Over time, Marley began to push the limits of his blindness. Charlie, always by his side, guided every step, but now Marley seemed more confident. He learned to map out the house, differentiate sounds and smells, and move with more assurance. Ethan, inspired by his dog's determination, decided to teach him new commands adapted to his condition. "Marley, come," he would call, tapping gently on the floor to guide the dog with the sound. Marley, although hesitant at first, began to respond to the calls. Each small progress was celebrated enthusiastically, with Charlie purring in approval beside him. As Marley relearned to live, Ethan found a renewed purpose in helping other animals in need. He started visiting a local shelter with Linda, sharing Marley and Charlie's story. "My dog is blind, but he never gave up," he would tell visitors. "And if he can do it, anyone can." The boy's words touched people, and soon, Marley and Charlie's story spread throughout the community. Other families began considering adopting animals with special needs, inspired by Ethan's example. Charlie, as always, played his role masterfully. He became a kind of mentor to the other animals at the shelter, often accompanying Ethan on his visits. When he found scared dogs or shy cats, Charlie would approach them with his usual calm, purring softly and offering comfort. To Ethan, it seemed as though the cat understood what each animal needed, just as he had understood Marley from the very beginning. "You're amazing, Charlie," Ethan would say, petting the little hero. One day, while walking through the park where Marley had been found, Ethan noticed something special. Marley, guided by Charlie, seemed more lively, sniffing the air and wagging his tail vigorously. It was as if the park, once a place of pain, now represented hope and overcoming adversity. Ethan watched, moved, as Marley, led by the cat, walked up to a bench where a child was sitting with her mother. Marley sniffed the air, recognizing the smell of cookies, and Ethan laughed. I guess he never lost his love for food. That night, when they returned home, Linda hugged Ethan and Marley tightly. "You two are an inspiration," she said, tears in her eyes. Even though Marley was blind, he had found a new life with his family and Charlie. And Ethan, with his dedication and love, had discovered that together, they not only overcame challenges but also brought hope to others. But just as everything seemed to be heading toward peace, a new letter arrived at the door. The sender, a name no one had expected. The letter was found the next morning, resting on the doormat at the entrance. Linda picked it up and frowned when she saw the sender, the shelter from where Marley had been rescued. Confused, she handed it to Grace, who was visiting that morning. When Grace opened the envelope, she found a simple note along with an official document. "Dear recipient, we believe this information belongs to you. We have recently discovered the origin of Marley." The attached document revealed something unexpected. Marley had been surrendered to the shelter by a man who claimed to be the original owner, but who had disappeared before providing any further details. The name on the document was someone Linda didn't recognize, but Grace noticed something strange. "This address is in the neighboring town," she said. Ethan, who had been listening to the conversation, asked with wide eyes, "Does that mean Marley has another family?" The possibility left everyone in silence. Ethan hugged Marley tightly, while Charlie watched closely, as if sensing the tension in the air. Grace tried to reassure them. Maybe this person didn't want him anymore, and that's how he ended up lost. But we need to investigate. Determined, Grace contacted the shelter and got the phone number of the man who had left Marley. One phone call was enough to arrange a meeting. "I want to understand what happened," she said over the phone. The next day, Grace and Linda drove to the address provided, bringing Marley and Charlie along. Ethan stayed home, anxious and uneasy, while Marley seemed restless, as if sensing something important. Charlie, as always, remained calm, purring reassuringly beside the dog. When they arrived at the location, a middle-aged man opened the door. His gaze was grim, but softened when he saw Marley. "I never wanted to abandon him," he began, his voice filled with regret. He told a story of financial and personal struggles that led him to make decisions that still haunted him. "I thought he'd have a better life without me," he said, as Marley, unable to see, sniffed the air, vaguely recognizing the presence. Grace and Linda listened in silence, while Charlie stood beside Marley like a protective shadow. At the end of the conversation, it was clear that the man was not in a position to claim Marley back. He said goodbye with tears in his eyes, thanking Grace and Linda for taking care of the dog he couldn't protect. When they returned home, Ethan ran to hug Marley, relieved to know he would stay with the family that now loved him. Charlie, as always, purred nearby, closing the day with the same quiet peace he had brought from the beginning. Marley was finally where he belonged, not just in a house, but in a home. If you were touched by Marley's story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Share it with your friends and don't forget to comment on what you thought of this journey of love.